will. I mean, I think back to the timing, the early 60s, there were a lot of Asian nations that were emerging at that time from colonialism. One can think of...
And African and Caribbean.
Of course, but if we just think about Asia and your experience within Asia, you had nations which I think economists were predicting would be truly powerhouse nations back then. Indonesia, the Philippines, Burma, Myanmar, all of these were tipped for the top. And yet, of course, we saw all of them in their different ways really struggle in the post-independence period. So was it just that Singapore had maybe it was size that allowed you to find a collective will that those other larger nations could not forge?
Well, I think it's a very difficult question, but let me put it this way. People think of Singapore as an economic success. That's what sort of catches attention very easily, per capita GDP and so on. But what was really interesting and unique about Singapore was social strategy, and most especially the fact that we took advantage of diversity, different races, different religions, and melded a nation where people were proud of being who they were, but were Singaporean first and foremost.
But was it melded from top down? And we can't get away from the figure of Lee Kuan Yew himself.
Yes.
It wasn't there at the beginning. He imposed it.
The natural workings of society would not have led it to that happening.
Right.
Not just in Singapore, but anywhere in the world. The natural workings of society would have just as easily and more likely have led to mistrust, discomfort, bigotry, and what we see in abundance in many countries in the world today. The most intrusive social policy in Singapore has turned out to be the most important. And it has a level of intrusiveness that doesn't come comfortably to the liberal mind.
What is it?
Housing estates. 85% of Singapore lives in public housing. It's not public housing that you are familiar with in the UK. It's not like your council housing, because when it's 85%, it covers the lower income group, the middle income group, the upper middle income group. These are middle class housing estates. But every single block of flats, block of apartments, and every single precinct requires an ethnic balance. That's intrusive.
How
because you're constraining...
It requires an ethnic balance in the sense the government decides how many of each ethnic grouping are going to...
So once a particular ethnic group gets beyond a certain quota in that block or that precinct, the resale market has to adjust. You can't just get more and more of the same people concentrating themselves in the same neighborhood. And I'd say this is, when it was first done, I don't think we knew how important it was going to be.
I mean, it sounds extraordinary.
It was done because...
authoritarian.
So it was intrusive, and it turns out to be our greatest strength. Because once people live together, they're not just walking the corridors together every day, taking the same elevator up and down. Their kids go to the same kindergarten. Their kids go to the same primary school. Because all over the world, young kids go to school very near to where they live. And they grow up together. The lessons coming out of Baltimore, the lessons coming out of France's large cities, the lessons coming out of all our societies show that neighborhoods matter, place matters, where you live matters. It matters much more than economists thought. It matters tremendously in the daily influences that shape your life and the traps you fall into.
But I dare say, and this is where we get into a conversation about Singapore that isn't, as you say, just about extraordinary growth rates and economic success, but is about the way in which the body politic works. To some of us sensitive flowers in the West, the authoritarianism that underpins that approach to managing a society feels uncomfortable to us.
Yeah, so that's a caricature. I mean, even The Economist, which is not exactly a cheerleader for Singapore, would say, as it just did in its editorial form of obituary when Mr. Lee Kuan Yew passed away, that Singapore has free, fair, and regular elections. We are a parliamentary democracy.